this draft been one of the more least hyped drafts?
It's one of the worst talented drafts in a while.
I heavily disagree.
You do?
Yeah. Daniel Jeremiah put out a great article about it yesterday, and I think this is basically exactly to a T where I stand on this draft. He said all 30 teams can leave this draft with 2 or 3 week 1 starters. There's that many players in this draft. There might be 2 superstars. You're taking second and third round players in the 20s, but they're good enough to start in the NFL. So for a team like the Bengals, where you have, your superstars kind of taken care of,
sure,
I think it's setting up to be as perfect as it can for a team with only 6 picks, where you need them to contribute right away. We're going to be able to get older guys in the 5th and 6th round that if we do break away from some of our, traditional Bengals drafting norms, you can get some elite production with guys that fall down the board because they're kind of just in the mix with everyone else. I think the similarities between the 50th best player this year and the 100th best player this year are pretty similar between like 7 and 20.
So there's a negative connotation with the word mediocre, which I don't know if that's necessarily always should be the case, because mediocre just means, it's average, right? It's just on par. It's just more of the normal. It's not a bad draft. It's a mediocre draft. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that could be fair. Certainly towards the top, it's going to be lighter than we've seen in recent history. I think Travis Hunter, depending on what he does in the NFL, can change the view of this draft pretty drastically. If he goes on and he is a two-way player in the NFL, then certainly this one would be looked back on as a pretty solid draft, because I have full confidence in Abdul Carter being an all-pro level player. I think Cam Ward already locked in going to the Titans at 1. I think he's going to be a good player. I think Will Campbell and Armand Membou are both great tackles. We've talked about a lot of the edge rushers that are very talented. So I think this is a good draft at the top. I do think a lot of that star power comes from a weak quarterback class, which usually drives most of the conversation.
It's one of the worst quarterback classes ever.
Well, the positions where it's deep aren't easy.
Sexy.
Right. Well, it's like, obviously, it's a really good running back.
Phenomenal.
It's a really good running back class, which, as you know, if you've watched this show for years, you know my take on running backs, though it's kind of twisted backwards a little bit because, things move and go.
Does this not prove your take right?
It does.
There's more running backs coming out of college that are NFL ready than ever.
Well, so that's the thing about running backs, and everyone always, running backs don't matter, and it's just like, listen, is Derrick Henry, I think he got $8 million last year. Is Derrick Henry getting $8 million a year a little bit of an overcorrection by NFL GMs? Certainly. Is Saquon Barkley made $14 last year?
Yeah.
Is Saquon Barkley worth more than $14 million? Certainly. A little bit of an overcorrection. The problem is while those guys are elite, certainly elite, much better than, the second tier of players, there's really not many bad running backs. like you can get pretty much decent protection or decent production out of anybody for $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, especially if you have a good offensive line. So that's where running backs don't. It's like middle relievers, I guess, or maybe it's closer to like
managers.
Managers is a good one. Catchers is maybe another one, to where when you have the Buster Posies of the world, when you have the Adley Rutschmans of the world, you put yourself in an extremely elite case. The JT Realmuto, when he was the best catcher in the game, you put yourself
Tyler Stevenson
above everyone else. But, Jose Trevino is pretty much like, you can get Jose Trevino and you're going to get a pretty good catcher out of it. You're certainly not going to hurt yourself at that catcher position. Certainly there are some teams that have just, terrible situations at running back and catcher, but you can solve it fairly cheaply. I don't know. You can just see, it just seems like let me put it this way. I've never looked at an NFL team and thought that team's a running back away from championship. Now we just saw what happened with the Philadelphia Eagles. They get Saquon Barkley and they look like a completely different team. But I've never looked at a team and go, man, that team is so close. They just need a running back, and they are going to be off to the races. So, in full, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, they're getting underpaid. Maybe the NFL shouldn't have let those guys get paid for $8 million and $14 million respectfully. But at the same jest, you can get a guy for $3.5 million. You can draft a guy in the 3rd or 4th round, and you'll probably do pretty well at the running back position, especially if you get a guy that fits your talent pool, like we did in Cincinnati with Chase Brown.
And get ready, Bengals fans, because they're taking another one.
Yeah.
They are absolutely, without a doubt, taking running back in this year's draft. I don't know what this will be, day 2 or day 3, but they're not going to leave this draft without a running back, and Bengals fans are going to lose their mind when that pick comes in, because if you go through the surprises last year, at least positively, Chase Brown's at the top of that list and maybe the only player on that list. So I think it's going to be certainly a tough pill for a lot of Bengals fans to swallow when they draft a running back in this class. But you took Chase Brown in the middle rounds a couple years ago. How often have we seen those middle round backs carve out consistent roles in offenses? Think about just 2 years ago, Isaiah Pacheco, 7th round pick, a little bit later than Chase Brown, but great year in Kansas City, wins a Super Bowl. They immediately turn and try to figure out who's next in that backfield.
Yeah.
So I think the perfect situation for Chase Brown is for the Bengals to pair him with a back. They met with both the Ohio State backs, Quinshon Judkins, TreVeyon Henderson. They met with Hamilton's own, Kaleb Johnson. So could be very, very fun to meet up with any of those three. They have been using mostly local visits on running back, so should be a little bit later in the draft than 2nd or 3rd round, but they will leave with a running back. And then 1st round looks like it's shaping up to be O-line if one of the tackles fall and they feel confident about moving them to guard. But they've also worked out Walter Nolan and a lot of the edge rushers as well. So defense in the 1st round seems like a priority.
Isn't it so funny that we get worked up about in baseball about the Dodgers spending all this money, and rightfully so. And we get worked up in the NBA about super teams being created. The NFL really doesn't seem to have this problem. But all sports, the 3 major American sports, if you don't draft well, you're not good.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Every team's foundation, every really, really good team, its foundation, sans the Los Angeles Dodgers, and to be frank, they did this. The reason that they'd won 10 straight National League West titles was a lot in part to do with bringing up their own talent. Now that's a different story. They've got a different team with Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, all coming from elsewhere. But in all sports, you got to hit on your draft picks. I mean, you look at who's the best team in the NBA? Boston Celtics. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, drafted by the Boston Celtics. Now they brought other pieces, Chris Stopps and everything like that. They brought other pieces in. The last dynasty in the NBA was the Warriors. All those guys were homegrown until they brought in Kevin Durant. Yeah, they supplement it. You look at baseball, the best teams in the past 10 years, the Astros, they seemingly drafted all their guys. The Atlanta Braves drafted and signed all their guys. The Chicago Cubs before that drafted and signed in international free agents. Like, those are all homegrown guys that we can talk about roster construction and everything like that. We know what it takes to be good in every sport. We know what it is. There's no secret sauce. There's no secret recipe. How you go about that might depend from franchise to franchise, but it's simply put, we have a draft, and you got to hit on the guys. That's why everyone's looking at the Kansas City Chiefs right now, and I know they just were 15-2. They won 2 consecutive Super Bowls, and they just went to the Super Bowl. But a lot of people are starting to look at this Kansas City Chiefs team and go, yikes, this roster isn't looking great. Are they going to start falling off? Well, the reason, if that is the case, if they do that, well, because they're not hitting on draft picks. They're not hitting on the weapons to help supplement Patrick Mahomes. They're not hitting on the offensive line talent to help supplement Patrick Mahomes and help protect Patrick Mahomes. The reason that the Philadelphia Eagles are so good, yeah, they just got Saquon Barkley for $14 million, but most of their guys were homegrown. I know A.J. Brown wasn't, but, a lot of line, a lot of defensive line, a lot of linebackers, like they're doing very well. They're doing very well. You simply put. And when you look at why the Bengals haven't been to the degree in which we expect them to be over the past few years, is because they haven't had many impact players brought through the draft since 2001. Now, I think that there's been a couple good drafts. I think, was it 2 years ago, the Chase Brown draft? Looking at that one in hindsight, there are some players that I think can help this team going forward. I think last year's draft class has a lot of, I don't know if influential players is the case, but a lot of helping hands. And I think you can do the same thing with this draft class, to where, hey, you got the superstars. Can you help surround them? We'll see.